First of all, I want to thank very much the Ms. Chano of the Sasagawa Peace Foundation for inviting me. My former student, Aya Murata, I feel like it's a family reunion here, has also been helping organize this event. And of course, I've known Yamaguchi-san now for 20 years. It frightens us to admit this. And I couldn't think of anyone better to introduce me. I've been working on sort of the culture of Japanese, or the way strategic culture is now the term of art, the term that people use of Japan and of Germany. I wrote my first book about that, and then I worked on the history issue for a long time. And this time I thought I would go back to my true love, intellectually speaking. I would go back to alliance management, studying of alliances. But, I think it's possible to stand at this point and sort of do a state of the alliance analysis. That is, where are we standing in terms of the U.S.-Japanese alliance? It wasn't very long ago that everyone was talking about how Japan and the U.S.-Japanese alliance was in the best of times. I mean, we had, just a few years ago, we had the deployment of Japanese forces to the Indian Ocean to support the Operation Enduring Freedom. We had Japanese ground self-defense forces deployed to Iraq. Japan agreed to participate in a very expensive and ambitious ballistic missile defense program, and everyone said, things couldn't be better. Then only a few years later, it became the worst of times. Right? I mean, we had, of course, the ending of Japan's overseas operations, the canceling of the refueling mission in the Indian Ocean. We had the bogging down of the relocation plan over Phtenma. We had, more recently, tensions rising, this frustration, shall we say, on the Japanese side about U.S. participation and willing to support it more strongly on the Senkaku-Diaoyu dispute. And again, things seem to be going in the opposite direction. But I think that both of these views are exaggerated. Yeah? I think that when we were in the best of times mode, there was an exaggeration, an overestimation of how far the U.S. and Japan would be able to go. And likewise, I think that then this was followed quite quickly by overly pessimistic kind of view of things. I think that the U.S. and Japanese alliance is in pretty good shape. I'll become just, ketsuron kara, just start from the conclusion. I mean, I think it's in pretty good shape, but I think that there's some very difficult challenges. You also have to take a look at deep-rooted ideas about the international system, which both countries have. And these ideas, in many ways, don't fit up together. There is a mismatch between the way Japanese and Americans tend to think about the alliance relationship. When one is here in Tokyo, it's very natural to think that maybe the U.S.-Japanese alliance is unique in terms of its strength and depth and endurance, how long and how strong this alliance has been. But actually, if you take a look around the world, it's interesting to note that the U.S. has created, in a way that is probably pretty unique, or unusual at least, historically speaking. The U.S. has created a system of alliances around the globe with many countries, which has gone over for 60 years and includes much of Western Europe, parts of East Asia, and to a certain extent in the Middle East as well. So what has made for this, because if we're thinking about the U.S.-Japanese alliance, what has made for this? What has allowed this particular system to come into being? And of course, part of the answer is U.S. power. I mean, this system was created at a time the U.S. was enormously powerful. If it hadn't been by the end of the 19th century, but it's okay. And if it weren't for the U.S. power, that system couldn't work at all. And so I guess one has to, why did the U.S. then? Because power alone doesn't make us create that system of alliances. It has to do with both what the U.S. decided to do with that power and also the extent to which the Allies accepted that use of U.S. power. Why did the Allies agree or assent to the U.S. playing these kinds of roles, the role that it does? This is a subject which many Americans actually almost view as atarimai, self-evident. It doesn't need explanation. And I think it's important to understand that the U.S. at least does not see itself as being motivated by some kind of hakkenshugi, some kind of hegemonism, which the Chinese often, by the way, accuse us of. Really, the United States approach, the way it views international security, came together as the result of particular lessons that the U.S. drew from the first half of the 20th century. What the U.S. is doing nowadays is actually in stark contrast to the traditional approach to foreign policy that the United States had. And at the end of World War II, there was a very deep, even before the end of World War II, there was a very deep, protracted debate in the United States about what we should do. U.S. commitment equals peace, right? U.S. lack of commitment equals war, and otherwise we go back in a conflict situation where we wind up paying a greater price in blood and treasure, people killed and money spent if we didn't do this. This is, of course, a realist argument in its core. It may be right, it may be wrong, I don't know. But it's amazing how many Americans really believe this. I believe it too, to some extent, all right? So it was also linked very strongly to a liberal vision of international relations. That is, that we stay committed not only to preserve the balance of power, but because we want to make a better world. This is naive American idealism combined with a kind of hard, calculating realism. We want to promote commerce, we want to promote trade, we want to promote with that, of course, because all good things go together, right? Democracy and human rights as well as with it. Now, in this context, alliances are very important. Alliances are vitally important for this U.S. idea, this U.S. mission of its role in the world, because both for practical and for normative reasons. Now, this system of alliances that we created has been anything but tranquil. Again, around the world, the history of the alliances is a history of misperceptions, misfiring, clashes of interests, and of repeated crises. But overall, this peculiar system has maintained itself with remarkable success. And indeed, in many ways, the sort of U.S. attitude towards this thing has been, this system and to this general strategy has been reinforced by our experiences of the second half of the 20th century. We managed to prevail over the Soviet Union through our commitment, and so that even strengthens that particular view of the alliance. Well, certainly things have changed, but again, if you take a look at different measures, has the U.S. really become that weak? Probably not. And from a point of view of alliance, of course, you also want to look at military resources. The U.S. defense spending is enormously high. 2011 data shows that the U.S. spent 47% of the world's money on defense. I mean, extraordinary. And if you were going to add, by the way, the other countries who are U.S. allies, NATO members, Canada, Japan, we have U.S. and its allies spent about 70% last year. Now, so that's, the U.S. has an intention and it has a capability, but it cannot maintain an alliance by itself. Yeah? We're not going to occupy our allies. When they ask us to leave, we leave. So what about Japan? Right? Takes two to tango, to use one of the American phrases. What is the Japanese view on the alliance? Well, the Japanese vision of the world and of security policy is very different from that of the United States. In many ways, Japan's main concerns since World War II, you always hear that refrain, Japan as a resource-poor island nation in East Asia. It's like almost a talismanic, a kimarimonku that always is used. But Japan as a resource-poor island nation has to focus on its economic needs. It has to focus on trade and development, and therefore has long relied on the United States to provide it with security from the strategic threat. Now, behind this idea, especially protection of its vital sea lanes of communication and nuclear deterrence, now, behind this idea is the fact that Japan drew almost the opposite lessons from the United States from the first half of the 20th century. Whereas the United States was pulled out of its strategic isolationism by the events of the first half of the 20th century, Japan, it seems, has gone in the opposite direction. Now, Japan still found itself having to rely on the United States, but it tried to maintain a very controlled alliance with the United States. It tried, fortunate it was a democracy. It was able to espouse with some conviction, it was able to convince and notion that it shared our liberal values. In some ways, it was more liberal in certain respects, certainly with ideas about international relations, than the United States. But at the same time, it tried to limit that alliance, and therefore, because of this mismatch between U.S. and Japanese strategic culture, we had often a very tricky alliance. My friend Mike Green, who also was with me in Japan when I began, he was once telling Donald Rumsfeld, he used this image all the time, told Donald Rumsfeld and other U.S. Military officials that in some ways Japan views the United States or the U.S. alliance a little bit like magical demons or ogres, oni, in Japanese folklore. I mean, you can make a deal with the demon, the ogre, to do something useful, like bring rain and protect you against the bandits. But it's a very dangerous deal, because if you don't watch out, he's going to wind up eating your crops and carrying off your daughters or something terrifying like that. So, there's always been this, and the alliance which resulted from this mismatch in views was a highly asymmetrical one, where the U.S. provided support and quite far-reaching support, and Japan in turn restricted the military support it provided the United States, generally aligning the United States with security issues and providing bases. And there was a great deal of dissatisfaction, by the way, with this relationship. I mean, the U.S. all the time, perennially, complained about how the Japanese aren't living up to their obligations, burden-sharing debate. The Japanese, both on the left and the right, many complained about the lack of shutaisei, the loss of independence in foreign policy, and the negative effect that it has upon the nation in terms of its policies and its sense of self, national pride. This policy, this relationship, this difficult relationship, dosho imu, sleeping in the same bed but having different dreams, was very effective and was very adaptable. However, there are problems. And there's some changes in the domestic political system in Japan and in the international system, which, if not handled properly, can create big problems, a lot of difficulties. The first on the domestic political front is that Japanese policy-making process has changed from what it was when I first came to Japan and what it was even, I would say, 15 years ago. That system is broken down. And as a result, we see public opinion intervening on the Japanese policy agenda a lot more than it used to, in often difficult and unpredictable ways. So, on one hand, Japan is looking towards the United States much more, again, as a friend because of the current situations. On the other hand, from the American point of view, Japan is a little bit more of a volatile, a difficult, an unpredictable partner than we're used to. And actually, I do think that both on the American side, on the Japanese side, we still sometimes sort of instinctively want to go back to the old system and hope that we can somehow manage things like Phtenma on the side through side agreements. That may be more difficult to do than was true in the past, given this change. A second development in Japan, and one that I think is often misinterpreted abroad, but it's nonetheless an important development, is the emergence of what I would call a reactive nationalism. It's more urban, it is more literate, lots of it is on the internet, which I think reflects not a kind of expansionist agenda, but a kind of frustration with Japan's situation, a feeling that Japan is declining, a feeling that Japan is being pushed around and not taken seriously by other countries, and it is a kind of reactive nationalism. Now, in terms of the international system, of course, the big change is the rise of China. There's the rise of China and also the emergence of new points of friction with China, especially, of course, Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. I mean, this has now become the center point of Japanese defense policy. Now, another problem which is related to this, but which I think is important to mention, is that we have had a rise of tensions over history issues, the Rekshi Ninshiki Mondai, or the history problem. This overlaps with what I'm talking about, but it's separable as well. And the tensions over the legacies of the imperial era in Japan has disrupted relations over and over again. It hasn't broken them down, but has disrupted and created problems in the relationship, not only with China, but also with the Republic of Korea, which should be Japan's natural ally. And again, objectively speaking, right, these are two countries which should be cooperating. The main challenge, I think, right now is not so much military. The main challenge, I think, actually is diplomatic right now. It is important that the United States and Japan are able to communicate and coordinate effectively on diplomatic issues. So we have this situation where we have this very difficult double balancing act between engaging and hedging against China, and at the same time trying to reassure and at the same time not overly provoke each other. You should not underestimate the extent to which the Chinese and the Koreans together lose their balance on Japan. Yeah? And I think that the United States and Japan, but also other allies, will need to work together and other strategic partnerships will need to work together in order to cope and manage what we hope is a peaceful, because China deserves a better place in the international system. It deserves the respect that a great country, a great civilization is entitled to, but not at the expense of everybody else. It's an excellent question, and it's one that is worth debating, and it's one I should think about more. So let me not pretend that I have a clear, hard, and fast answer or even, suggestion for this. I think actually, the U.S. from our point of view, begin on Takeshima. First of all, the ICJ. Okay, on Takeshima Dokdo, you should only go to the ICJ if you are sure that Japan will lose. It would be a disaster if Japan went to Takeshima Dokdo and you won, right? I mean, it really would not be in Japan's national interest to do that, because it'll just totally enrage the Koreans. And it really, I mean, I think you're best shelving the issue on the sovereignty issue and finding ways of reframing Takeshima Dokdo. And I think there's some readiness in Korea, in some quarters, to think about other ways of managing the Takeshima Dokdo issue than it has been managed in the past.